Section 4 of The Adventures of Paddy Beaver. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by John Leader. The Adventures of Paddy Beaver by Thornton W. Burgess. Chapter 12. Jerry Muskrat Learns Something. If you think you know it all, you are riding for a fall. Use your ears and use your eyes, but hold your tongue and you'll be wise. Jerry Muskrat will tell you that is as true can be. Jerry knows. He found it out for himself. Now, he is very careful what he says about other people or what they are doing, but he wasn't so careful when his cousin, Paddy the Beaver, was building his house. No, sir, Jerry wasn't so careful then. He thought he knew more about building a house than Paddy did. He was sure of it when he watched Paddy heap up a great pile of mud right in the middle where his room ought to be, and then build a wall of sticks around it. He said as much to Peter Rabbit. Now, it is never safe to say anything to Peter Rabbit that you don't care to have others know. Peter has a great deal of respect for Jerry Muskrat's opinion on house building. You see, he very much admires Jerry's snug house in the Smiling Pool. It really is a very fine house, and Jerry may be excused for being proud of it. But that doesn't excuse Jerry for thinking that he knows all there is to know about house building. Of course, Peter told everyone he met that Paddy the Beaver was making a foolish mistake in building his house, and that Jerry Muskrat, who ought to know, said so. So whenever they got the chance, the little people of the Green Forest and the Green Meadows would steal up to the shore of Paddy's new pond and chuckle as they looked out at the great pile of sticks and mud which Paddy had built for a house, but in which he had forgotten to make a room. At least, they supposed that he had forgotten this very important thing. He must have, for there wasn't any room. It was a great joke. They laughed a lot about it, and they lost a great deal of the respect for Paddy which they had had since he built his wonderful dam. Jerry and Peter sat in the moonlight talking it over. Paddy had stopped bringing sticks for his wall. He had dived down out of sight, and he was gone a long time. Suddenly, Jerry noticed that the water had grown very, very muddy all around Paddy's new house. He wrinkled his brows, trying to think what Paddy could be doing. Presently Paddy came up for air. Then he went down again, and the water grew muddier than ever. This went on for a long time. Every little while Paddy would come up for air and a few minutes of rest. Then down he would go, and the water would grow muddier and muddier. At last Jerry could stand it no longer. He just had to see what was going on. He slipped into the water and swam over to where the water was muddiest. Just as he got there, up came Paddy.
"Hello, Cousin Jerry," said he. "I was just going to invite you over to see what you think of my house inside. Just follow me."
Paddy dived, and Jerry dived after him. He followed Paddy in at one of the 3 doorways under water and up a smooth hall right into the biggest, nicest bedroom Jerry had ever seen in all his life. He just gasped in sheer surprise. He couldn't do anything else. He couldn't find his tongue to say a word. Here he was in this splendid, great room up above the water, and he had been so sure that there wasn't any room at all. He just didn't know what to make of it. Paddy's eyes twinkled.
"Well," said he, "what do you think of it?"
I think it is splendid, just perfectly splendid. But I don't understand it at all, Cousin Paddy. Where is that great pile of mud I helped you build in the middle?"
Jerry looked as foolish as he felt when he asked this.
"Why, I've dug it all away, and that's what made the water so muddy,"
replied Paddy.
"But what did you build it for in the first place?"
Jerry persisted.
"Because I had to have something to rest my sticks against while I was building my walls, of course,"
replied Paddy.
"When I got the tops fastened together for a roof, they didn't need a support any longer, and then I dug it away to make this room. I couldn't have built such a big room any other way.
I see you don't know very much about house building, Cousin Jerry. I'm afraid I don't,"
confessed Jerry sadly. End of chapter 12. Chapter 13. The Queer Storehouse. Everybody knew that Paddy the Beaver was laying up a supply of food for the winter, and everybody thought it was queer food. That is, everybody but Prickly Porky the Porcupine thought so. Prickly Porky likes the same kind of food, but he never lays up a supply. He just goes out and gets it when he wants it, winter or summer. What kind of food was it? Why, bark, to be sure. Yes, sir, it was just bark, the bark of certain kinds of trees. Now, Prickly Porky can climb the trees and eat the bark right there, but Paddy the Beaver cannot climb, and if he should just eat the bark that he can reach from the ground, it would take such a lot of trees to keep him filled up that he would soon spoil the Green Forest. You know, when the bark is taken off a tree all the way around, the tree dies. That is because all the things that a tree draws out of the ground to make it grow and keep it alive are carried up from the roots in the sap. And the sap cannot go up the tree trunks and into the branches when the bark is taken off, because it is up the inside of the bark that it travels. So when the bark is taken from a tree all the way around the trunk, the tree just starves to death. Now, Paddy the Beaver loves the Green Forest as dearly as you and I do, and perhaps even a little more dearly. You see, it is his home. Besides, Paddy never is wasteful. So he cuts down a tree so that he can get all the bark instead of killing a whole lot of trees for a very little bark, as he might do if he were lazy. There isn't a lazy bone in him, not one. The bark he likes best is from the aspen. When he cannot get that, he will eat the bark from the poplar, the alder, the willow, and even the birch, but he likes the aspen so much better that he will work very hard to get it. Perhaps it tastes better because he does have to work so hard for it. There were some aspen trees growing right on the edge of the pond Paddy had made in the Green Forest. These he cut just as he had cut the trees for his dam. As soon as a tree was down, he would cut it into short lengths, and with these swim out to where the water was deep, close to his new house. He took them one by one and carried the first ones to the bottom, where he pushed them into the mud just enough to hold them. Then, as fast as he brought more, he piled them on the first ones, and so the pile grew and grew. Jerry Muskrat, Peter Rabbit, Bobby Coon, and the other little people of the Green Forest watched him with the greatest interest and curiosity. They couldn't quite make out what he was doing. It was almost as if he were building the foundation for another house.
"What's he doing, Jerry?"
demanded Peter when he could keep still no longer.
"I don't exactly know,"
replied Jerry.
"He said that he was going to lay in a supply of food for the winter, just as I told you, and I suppose that is what he is doing, but I don't quite understand what he is taking it all out into the pond for. I believe I'll go ask him."
"Well, do, and then come tell us,"
begged Peter, who was growing so curious that he couldn't sit still. So Jerry swam out to where Paddy was so busy.
"Is this your food supply, Cousin Paddy?"
he asked. "Yes," replied Paddy, crawling up on the side of the house to rest.
"Yes, this is my food supply. Isn't it splendid?"
"I guess it is,"
replied Jerry, trying to be polite,
"though I like lily roots and clams better. But what are you going to do with it? Where is your storehouse?"
"The pond is my storehouse,"
replied Paddy.
"I will make a great pile right here close to my house, and the water will keep it nice and fresh all winter. When the pond is frozen over, all I have to do is slip out one of my doorways down there on the bottom, swim over here and get a stick and fill my stomach. Isn't it handy?"
End of chapter 13. Chapter 14. A Footprint in the Mud. Very early one morning, Paddy the Beaver heard Sammy Jay making a terrible fuss over in the aspen trees on the edge of the pond Paddy had made in the Green Forest. Paddy couldn't see because he was inside his house, and it has no window, but he could hear. He wrinkled up his brows thoughtfully.
"It seems to me that Sammy is very much excited this morning,"
said he, talking to himself, a way he has because he is so much alone.
"When he screams like that, Sammy is usually trying to do two things at once, make trouble for somebody and keeping somebody else out of trouble. And when you come to think of it, that's rather a funny way of doing. It shows that he isn't all bad, and at the same time he is a long way from being all good. Now I should say from the sounds that Sammy has discovered Reddy Fox trying to steal up on someone over where my aspen trees are growing. Reddy is afraid of me, but I suspect that he knows that Peter Rabbit has been hanging around here a lot lately, watching me work, and he thinks perhaps he can catch Peter. I shall have to whisper in one of Peter's long ears and tell him to watch out."
After a while he heard Sammy Jay's voice growing fainter and fainter in the Green Forest. Finally he couldn't hear it at all.
"Whoever was there has gone away, and Sammy has followed just to torment them,"
thought Paddy. He was very busy making a bed. He is very particular about his bed, is Paddy the Beaver. He makes it of fine splinters of wood, which he splits off with those wonderful great cutting teeth of his. This makes the driest kind of a bed. It requires a great deal of patience and work, but patience is one of the first things a little beaver learns, and honest work well done is one of the greatest pleasures in the world, as Paddy long ago found out for himself. So he kept at work on his bed for some time after all was still outside. At last Paddy decided that he would go over to his aspen trees and look them over to decide which ones he would cut the next night. He slid down one of his long halls, out the doorway at the bottom of the pond, and then swam up to the surface, where he floated for a few minutes with just his head out of water. And all the time his eyes and nose and ears were busy looking, smelling, and listening for any sign of danger. Everything was still. Sure that he was quite safe, Paddy swam across to the place where the aspen trees grew, and waddled out on the shore. Paddy looked this way and looked that way. He looked up in the tree tops, and he looked off up the hill, but most of all he looked at the ground. Yes, sir, Paddy just studied the ground. You see, he hadn't forgotten the fuss Sammy Jay had been making there, and he was trying to find out what it was all about. At first he didn't see anything unusual, but by and by he happened to notice a little wet place, and right in the middle of it was something that made Paddy's eyes open wide. It was a footprint. Someone had carelessly stepped in the mud.
"Ah!"
exclaimed Paddy, and the hair on his back lifted ever so little, and for a minute he had a prickly feeling all over. The footprint was very much like that of Reddy Fox, only it was larger. "Ha!" said Paddy again.
"That certainly is the footprint of Old Man Coyote. I see I have got to watch out more sharply than I had thought. All right, Mr. Coyote. Now that I know you are about, you'll have to be smarter than I think you are to catch me. You certainly will be back here tonight looking for me, so I think I'll do my cutting right now in the daytime."
End of Chapter 14. Chapter 15. Sammy Jay makes Paddy a call. Paddy the Beaver was hard at work. He had just cut down a good-sized aspen tree, and now he was gnawing it into short lengths to put in his food pile in the pond. As he worked, Paddy was doing a lot of thinking about the footprint of Old Man Coyote in a little patch of mud, for he knew that meant that Old Man Coyote had discovered his pond, and would be hanging around, hoping to catch Paddy off his guard. Paddy knew it just as well as if Old Man Coyote had told him so. That was why he was at work cutting his food supply in the daytime. Usually he works at night, and he knew that Old Man Coyote knew it.
"He'll try to catch me then,"
thought Paddy.
"So I'll do my working on land now and fool him."
The tree he was cutting began to sway and crack. Paddy cut out one more big chip, then hurried away to a safe place where the tree fell with a crash.
Thief! 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 Screamed a voice just back of Paddy. Hello, Sammy Jay. I see you don't feel any better than usual this morning,
said Paddy.
Don't you want to sit up in this tree while I cut it down?
Sammy grew black in the face with anger, for he knew that Paddy was laughing at him. You remember how only a few days before he had been so intent on calling Paddy bad names that he actually hadn't noticed that Paddy was cutting the very tree in which he was sitting? And so when it fell he had had a terrible fright.
You think you're very smart, Mr. Beaver, but you'll think differently one of these fine days,
screamed Sammy.
If you know what I know, you wouldn't be so well satisfied with yourself.
What do you know?
Asked Paddy, pretending to be very much alarmed.
I'm not going to tell you what I know,
retorted Sammy Jay.
You'll find out soon enough, and when you do find out, you'll never steal another tree from our green forest. Somebody's going to catch you, and it isn't Farmer Brown's boy either.
Paddy pretended to be terribly frightened.
Oh, who is it? Please tell me, Mr. Jay,
he begged. Now, to be called Mr. Jay made Sammy feel very important. Nearly everybody else called him Sammy. He swelled himself out, trying to look as important as he felt, and his eyes snapped with pleasure. He was actually making Paddy the Beaver afraid. At least he thought he was.
No, sir, I won't tell you,
he replied.
I wouldn't be you for a great deal, though. Somebody who is smarter than you are is going to catch you, and when he gets through with you, there won't be anything left but a few bones. No, sir, nothing but a few bones.
Oh, Mr. Jay, this is terrible news. Whatever am I to do?
Cried Paddy, all the time keeping right on at work cutting another tree.
There's nothing you can do,
replied Sammy, grinning wickedly at Paddy's fright.
There's nothing you can do unless you go right straight back to the north where you came from. You think you're very smart, but...
Sammy didn't finish. Crack! Over fell the tree Paddy had been cutting, and the top of it fell straight into the alder in which Sammy was sitting.
Oh, help!
Shrieked Sammy, spreading his wings and flying away just in time. Paddy sat down and laughed until his sides ached.
Come make me another call some day, Sammy,
he said.
And when you do, please bring me some real news. I know all about Old Man Coyote. You can tell him for me that when he is planning to catch people, he should be careful not to leave footprints to give himself away.
Sammy didn't reply. He just sneaked off through the Green Forest, looking quite as foolish as he felt. End of chapter 15. And end of section 4. Recording by John Leader, Bloomington, Illinois. Section 5 of The Adventures of Paddy Beaver. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by John Leader. The Adventures of Paddy Beaver by Thornton W. Burgess. Chapter 16. Old Man Coyote is Very Crafty. Coyote has a crafty brain. His wits are sharp, his ends to gain. There is nothing in the world more true than that. Old Man Coyote has the craftiest brain of all the little people of the Green Forest or the Green Meadows. Sharp as are the wits of old Granny Fox, they are not quite as sharp as the wits of Old Man Coyote. If you want to fool him, you will have to get up very early in the morning, and then it is more than likely that you will be the one fooled, not he. There is very little going on around him that he doesn't know about, but once in a while something escapes him. The coming of Paddy the Beaver to the Green Forest was one of these things. He didn't know a thing about Paddy until Paddy had finished his dam and his house and was cutting his supply of food for the winter. You see, it was this way. When the Merry Little Breezes of Old Mother West Wind first heard what was going on in the Green Forest and hurried around over the Green Meadows and through the Green Forest to spread the news, as is their way, they took the greatest pains not to even hint it to Old Man Coyote, because they were afraid that he would make trouble and perhaps drive Paddy away.
The place that Paddy had chosen to build his dam was so deep in the Green Forest that Old Man Coyote seldom went that way. So it was that he knew nothing about Paddy, and Paddy knew nothing about him for some time. But after a while Old Man Coyote noticed that the little people of the Green Meadows were not about as much as usual. They seemed to have a secret of some kind. He mentioned the matter to his friend Digger the Badger. Digger had been so intent on his own affairs that he hadn't noticed anything unusual. But when Old Man Coyote mentioned the matter, he remembered that Blacky the Crow headed straight for the Green Forest every morning. Several times he had seen Sammy Jay flying in the same direction as if in a great hurry to get somewhere. Old Man Coyote grinned.
"That's all I need to know, friend Digger," said he. "When Blacky the Crow and Sammy Jay visit a place more than once, something interesting is going on there. I think I'll take a stroll up through the Green Forest and have a look around."
With that, Old Man Coyote started, but he was too sly and crafty to go straight to the Green Forest. He pretended to hunt around over the Green Meadows, just as he usually did, all the time working nearer and nearer to the Green Forest. When he reached the edge of it, he slipped in among the trees, and when he felt sure that no one was likely to see him, he began to run this way and that way with his nose to the ground.
"Ha!" he exclaimed presently. "Reddy Fox has been this way lately."
Pretty soon he found another trail.
"So," said he, "Peter Rabbit has been over here a good deal of late, and his trail goes in the same direction as that of Reddy Fox. I guess all I have to do now is to follow Peter's trail, and it will lead me to what I want to find out."
So Old Man Coyote followed Peter's trail, and he presently came to the pond of Paddy the Beaver.
"Ha!"
said he, as he looked out and saw Paddy's new house.
"So there is a newcomer to the Green Forest. I have always heard that Beaver is very good eating. My stomach begins to feel empty this very minute."
His mouth began to water, and a fierce, hungry look shone in his yellow eyes. It was just then that Sammy Jay saw him and began to scream at the top of his lungs so that Paddy the Beaver over in his house heard him. Old Man Coyote knew that it was of no use to stay longer with Sammy Jay about, so he took a hasty look at the pond and found where Paddy came ashore to cut his food. Then, shaking his fist at Sammy Jay, he started straight back for the Green Meadows.
"I'll just pay a visit here in the night," said he, "and give Mr. Beaver a surprise while he is at work."
But with all his craft, Old Man Coyote didn't notice that he had left a footprint in the mud.
Chapter 17.
Old Man Coyote is disappointed. Old Man Coyote lay stretched out in his favorite napping place on the Green Meadows. He was thinking of what he had found out up in the Green Forest that morning, that Paddy the Beaver was living there. Old Man Coyote's thoughts seemed very pleasant to himself, though really they were very dreadful thoughts. You see, he was thinking how easy it was going to be to catch Paddy the Beaver, and what a splendid meal he would make. He licked his chops at the thought.
"He doesn't know I know he's here," thought Old Man Coyote. "In fact, I don't believe he even knows that I am anywhere around. Of course, he won't be watching for me. He cuts his trees at night, so all I have to do is to hide right close by where he is at work, and he'll walk right into my mouth. Sammy Jay knows I was up there this morning, but Sammy sleeps at night, so he will not give the alarm. My, how good that Beaver will taste!"
He licked his chops once more, then yawned and closed his eyes for a nap. Old Man Coyote waited until jolly, round, red Mr. Sun had gone to bed behind the Purple Hills, and the Black Shadows had crept out across the Green Meadows. Then, keeping in the blackest of them, and looking very much like a shadow himself, he slipped into the Green Forest.
It was dark there, and he made straight for Paddy's new pond, trotting along swiftly without making a sound. When he was near the aspen trees which he knew Paddy was planning to cut, he crept forward very slowly and carefully. Everything was still as still could be. "Good," thought Old Man Coyote. "I am here first, and now all I need do is to hide and wait for Paddy to come ashore." So he stretched himself flat behind some brush close beside the little path Paddy had made up from the edge of the water and waited. It was very still, so still that it seemed almost as if he could hear his heart beat. He could see the little stars twinkling in the sky and their own reflections twinkling back at them from the water of Paddy's pond. Old Man Coyote waited and waited. He is very patient when there is something to gain by it. For such a splendid dinner as Paddy the Beaver would make, he felt that he could well afford to be patient. So he waited and waited, and everything was as still as if no living thing but the trees were there. Even the trees seemed to be asleep. At last, after a long, long time, he heard just the faintest splash. He pricked up his ears and peeped out on the pond with the hungriest look in his yellow eyes. There was a little line of silver coming straight towards him. He knew that it was made by Paddy the Beaver swimming. Nearer and nearer it drew. Old Man Coyote chuckled way down deep inside, without making a sound. He could see Paddy's head now, and Paddy was coming straight in as if he hadn't a fear in the world. Almost to the edge of the pond swam Paddy. Then he stopped. In a few minutes he began to swim again, but this time it was back in the direction of his house, and he seemed to be carrying something. It was one of the little food logs he had cut that day, and he was taking it out to his storehouse. Then he came back for another, and so he kept on, never once coming ashore. Old Man Coyote waited until Paddy had carried the last log to his storehouse, and then, with a loud whack on the water with his broad tail, had dived and disappeared in his house. Then Old Man Coyote arose and started elsewhere to look for his dinner, and in his heart was bitter disappointment. Chapter 17. Chapter 18. Old Man Coyote tries another plan. For 3 nights Old Man Coyote had stolen up through the Green Forest with the coming of the Black Shadows and had hidden among the aspen trees where Paddy the Beaver cuts his food, and for 3 nights Paddy had failed to come ashore. Each night he had seemed to have enough food logs in the water to keep him busy without cutting more. Old Man Coyote lay there, and the hungry look in his eyes changed to one of doubt and then to suspicion. Could it be that Paddy the Beaver was smarter than he thought? It began to look very much as if Paddy knew perfectly well that he was hiding there each night. Yes, sir, that's the way it looked. For 3 nights Paddy hadn't cut a single tree, and yet each night he had plenty of food logs ready to take to his storehouse in the pond. "That means he comes ashore in the daytime and cuts his trees," thought Old Man Coyote as, tired and with black anger in his heart, he trotted home the 3rd night. "He couldn't have found out about me himself. He isn't smart enough. It must be that some one has told him. And nobody knows that I have been over there but Sammy Jay. It must be he who has been the tattletale. I think I'll visit Paddy by daylight tomorrow, and then we'll see." Now, the trouble with some smart people is that they are never able to believe that others may be as smart as they. Old Man Coyote didn't know that the first time he had visited Paddy's pond he had left behind him a footprint in a little patch of soft mud. If he had known it, he wouldn't have believed that Paddy would be smart enough to guess what that footprint meant. Old Man Coyote laid all the blame at the door of Sammy Jay, and that very morning, when Sammy came flying over the Green Meadows,
Old Man Coyote accused him of being a tattletale and threatened the most dreadful things to Sammy if ever he caught him. Now Sammy had flown down to the Green Meadows to tell Old Man Coyote how Paddy was doing all his work on land in the daytime, but when Old Man Coyote began to call him a tattletale and accuse him of having warned Paddy and to threaten dreadful things, he straightway forgot all his anger at Paddy and turned it all on Old Man Coyote. He called him everything he could think of, and this was a great deal, for Sammy has a wicked tongue. When he hadn't any breath left, he flew over to the Green Forest, and there he hid where he could watch all that was going on. That afternoon Old Man Coyote tried his new plan. He slipped into the Green Forest, looking this way and that way to be sure that no one saw him. Then,
very, very softly,
he crept up through the Green Forest towards the pond of Paddy the Beaver. As he drew near, he heard a crash, and it made him smile. He knew what that meant. It meant that Paddy was at work cutting down trees. With his stomach almost on the ground, he crept forward little by little, taking the greatest care not to rustle so much as a leaf. Presently he reached a place where he could see the aspen trees, and there, sure enough, was Paddy sitting up on his hind legs and hard at work cutting another tree. Old Man Coyote lay down for a few minutes to watch. Then he wriggled a little nearer. Slowly and carefully he drew his legs under him and made ready for a rush. Paddy the Beaver was his at last. At just that very minute a harsh scream rang out right over his head.
Thief! Thief! Thief!
It was Sammy Jay, who had silently followed him all the way. Paddy the Beaver didn't stop to even look around. He knew what that scream meant, and he scrambled down his little path to the water as he never had scrambled before. And as he dived with a great splash, Old Man Coyote landed with a great jump on the very edge of the pond. End of chapter 18, and end of section 5. Recording by John Leader, Bloomington, Illinois. Section 6 of The Adventures of Paddy Beaver. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by John Leader. The Adventures of Paddy Beaver by Thornton W. Burgess. Chapter 19. Paddy and Sammy Become Friends. Paddy the Beaver floated in his pond and grinned in the most provoking way at Old Man Coyote, who had so nearly caught him. Old Man Coyote fairly danced with anger on the bank. He had felt so sure of Paddy that time that it was hard work to believe that Paddy had really gotten away from him. He bared his long, cruel teeth, and he looked very fierce and ugly.
"Come on in! The water's fine!"
called Paddy. Now, of course this wasn't a nice thing for Paddy to do, for it only made Old Man Coyote all the angrier. You see, Paddy knew perfectly well that he was absolutely safe, and he just couldn't resist the temptation to say some unkind things. He had had to be on the watch for days lest he should be caught, and so he hadn't been able to work quite so well as he could have done with nothing to fear. And he still had a lot of preparations to make for winter. So he told Old Man Coyote just what he thought of him, and that he wasn't as smart as he thought he was, or he never would have left a footprint in the mud to give him away. When Sammy Jay, who was listening and chuckling as he listened, heard that, he flew down where he would be just out of reach of Old Man Coyote. And then he just turned that tongue of his loose, and you know that some people say that Sammy's tongue is hung in the middle and wags at both ends. Of course this isn't really so, but when he gets to abusing people it seems as if it must be true. He called Old Man Coyote every bad name he could think of. He called him a sneak, a thief, a coward, a bully, and a lot of other things.
You said I had warned Paddy that you were trying to catch him, and that was why you failed to find him at work at night, and all the time you had warned him yourself,
screamed Sammy.
I used to think you were smart, but I know better now. Paddy is twice as smart as you are. Mr. Coyote is ever so sly. Mr. Coyote is clever and spry. If you believe all you hear, Mr. Coyote is not of the kind. Mr. Coyote is stupid and blind. He can't catch a flea on his ear.
Paddy the Beaver laughed till the tears came at Sammy's foolish verse, but it made Old Man Coyote angrier than ever. He was angry with Paddy for escaping from him, and he was angry with Sammy, terribly angry, and the worst of it was, he couldn't catch either one, for one was at home in the water, and the other was at home in the air, and he couldn't follow in either place. Finally he saw it was of no use to stay there to be laughed at, so, muttering and grumbling, he started for the Green Meadows. As soon as he was out of sight, Paddy turned to Sammy Jay. "Mr. Jay," said he, knowing how it pleased Sammy to be called Mister.
Mr. Jay, you have done me a mighty good turn to-day, and I am not going to forget it. You can call me what you please and scream at me all you please, but you won't get any satisfaction out of it, because I simply won't get angry. I will say to myself, Mr. Jay saved my life the other day, and then I won't mind your tongue."
Now this made Sammy feel very proud and very happy. You know, it is very seldom that he hears anything nice said of him. He flew down on the stump of one of the trees Paddy had cut.
"Let's be friends,"
said he.
"With all my heart,"
replied Paddy. End of chapter 19. Chapter 20. Sammy Jay offers to help Paddy. Paddy sat looking thoughtfully at the aspen trees he would have to cut to complete his store of food for the winter. All those near the edge of his pond had been cut. The others were scattered about some little distance away.
"I don't know," said Paddy out loud. "I don't know."
"What don't you know?"
asked Sammy Jay, who, now that he and Paddy had become friends, was very much interested in what Paddy was doing.
"Why,"
replied Paddy,
"I don't know just how I am going to get those trees. Now that Old Man Coyote is watching for me, it isn't safe for me to go very far from my pond. I suppose I could dig a canal up to some of the nearest trees and then float them down to the pond. But it is hard to work and keep sharp watch for enemies at the same time. I guess I'll have to be content with some of these alders growing close to the water, but the bark of aspens is so much better that I wish I could get them."
"What's a canal?"
asked Sammy abruptly.
"A canal? Why, a canal is a kind of ditch in which water can run," replied Paddy.
Sammy nodded.
"I've seen Farmer Brown dig one over on the Green Meadows, but it looked like a great deal of work. I didn't suppose that anyone else could do it. Do you really mean that you can dig a canal, Paddy?"
"Of course I mean it," replied Paddy in a surprised tone of voice. "I have helped dig lots of canals. You ought to see some of them back where I came from."
"I'd like to,"
replied Sammy.
"I think it is perfectly wonderful. I don't see how you do it."
"It's easy enough when you know how," replied Paddy. "If I dared to, I'd show you."
Sammy had a sudden idea. It almost made him gasp.
"I tell you what, you work and I'll keep watch,"
he cried.
"You know my eyes are very sharp."
"Will you?" cried Paddy eagerly. "Oh, that would be perfectly splendid. You have the sharpest eyes of anyone whom I know, and I would feel perfectly safe with you on watch. But I don't want to put you to all that trouble, Mr. Jay."
"Of course I will,"
replied Sammy.
"and it won't be any trouble at all. I'll just love to do it."
You see, it made Sammy feel very proud to have Paddy say that he had such sharp eyes.
"When will you begin?"
Right away, if you will just take a look around and see that it is perfectly safe for me to come out on land."
Sammy didn't wait to hear more. He spread his beautiful blue wings and started off over the Green Forest straight for the Green Meadows. Paddy watched him go with a puzzled and disappointed air.
"That's funny," thought he. "I thought he really meant it, and now off he goes without even saying good-bye."
In a little while back came Sammy all out of breath.
It's all right.
He panted.
You can go to work just as soon as you please.
Paddy looked more puzzled than ever.
"How do you know?"
he asked. "I haven't seen you looking around."
I did better than that,
replied Sammy.
If Old Man Coyote had been hiding somewhere in the Green Forest, it might have taken me some time to find him, but he isn't. You see, I flew straight over to his home in the Green Meadows to see if he is there, and he is. He's taking a sun bath and looking as cross as two sticks. I don't think he'll be back here this morning, but I'll keep a sharp watch while you work."
Paddy made Sammy a low bow.
"You certainly are smart, Mr. Jay,"
said he.
"I wouldn't have thought of going over to Old Man Coyote's home to see if he was there. I feel perfectly safe with you on guard. Now I'll get to work."
End of chapter 20. Chapter 21. Paddy and Sammy Jay Work Together. Jerry Muskrat had been home at the Smiling Pool for several days, but he couldn't stay there long. Oh my, no! He just had to get back to see what his big cousin Paddy the Beaver was doing. So as soon as he was sure that everything was all right at the Smiling Pool, he hurried back up the Laughing Brook to Paddy's pond, deep in the Green Forest. As soon as he was in sight of it, he looked eagerly for Paddy. At first he didn't see him. Then he stopped and gazed over at the place where Paddy had been cutting aspen trees for food. Something was going on there, something queer. He couldn't make it out. Just then Sammy Jay came flying over. "What's Paddy doing?" Jerry asked. Sammy Jay dropped down to the top of an alder tree and fluffed out all his feathers in a very important way.
"Oh,"
said he,
"Paddy and I are building something."
"You, Paddy and you, Paddy and you building something,"
Jerry laughed.
"Yes, me,"
snapped Sammy angrily.
"That's what I said. Paddy and I are building something."
Jerry had begun to swim across the pond by this time, and Sammy was flying across.
"Why don't you tell the truth, Sammy, and say that Paddy is building something, and you are making him all the trouble you can?"
called Jerry. Sammy's eyes snapped angrily, and he darted down at Jerry's little brown head.
"It isn't true!"
he shrieked.
"You ask Paddy if I'm not helping."
Jerry ducked under water to escape Sammy's sharp bill. When he came up again, Sammy was over in the little grove of aspen trees where Paddy was at work. Then Jerry discovered something. What was it? Why, a little water path led right up to the aspen trees, and there at the end of the little water path was Paddy the Beaver hard at work. He was digging and piling the earth on one side very neatly. In fact, he was making the water path longer. Jerry swam right up the little water path to where Paddy was working.
"Good morning, Cousin Paddy," said he. "What are you doing?"
"Oh,"
replied Paddy,
"Sammy Jay and I are building a canal."
Sammy Jay looked down at Jerry in triumph, and Jerry looked at Paddy as if he thought that he was joking.
"Sammy Jay? What's Sammy Jay got to do about it?"
demanded Jerry.
"A whole lot," replied Paddy. "You see, he keeps watch while I work. If he didn't, I couldn't work, and there wouldn't be any canal. Old Man Coyote has been trying to catch me, and I wouldn't dare work on shore if it wasn't that I am sure that the sharpest eyes in the Green Forest are watching for danger."
Sammy Jay looked very much pleased indeed and very proud.
"So you see it takes both of us to make this canal. I dig while Sammy watches, so we are building it together," concluded Paddy with a twinkle in his eyes.
"I see,"
said Jerry slowly. Then he turned to Sammy Jay.
"I beg your pardon, Sammy," said he. "I do indeed."
"That's all right,"
replied Sammy airily.
What do you think of our canal?
I think it is wonderful,
replied Jerry. And indeed it was a very fine canal, straight, wide, and deep enough for Paddy to swim in and float his logs out to the pond. Yes, indeed, it was a very fine canal. Chapter 21. Chapter 22. Paddy finishes his harvest.
Sharp his tongue and sharp his eyes, Sammy guards against surprise. If 'twere not for Sammy Jay, I could do no work to-day.
When Sammy Jay overheard Paddy the Beaver say that to Jerry Muskrat, it made him swell up all over with pure pride. You see, Sammy is so used to hearing bad things about himself that to hear something nice like that pleased him immensely. He straightway forgot all the mean things he had said to Paddy when he first saw him, how he had called him a thief because he had cut the aspen trees he needed. He forgot all about this. He forgot how Paddy had made him the laughing stock of the Green Forest and the Green Meadows by cutting down the very tree in which he had been sitting. He forgot everything but that Paddy had trusted him to keep watch and now was saying nice things about him. He made up his mind that he would deserve all the nice things that Paddy could say, and he thought that Paddy was the finest fellow in the world. Jerry Muskrat looked doubtful. He didn't trust Sammy, and he took care not to go far from the water when he heard that Old Man Coyote had been hanging around. But Paddy worked away just as if he hadn't a fear in the world.
The way you make people want to be trusted is to trust them,
said he to himself.
If I show Sammy Jay that I don't really trust him, he will think it is of no use to try and will give up. But if I do trust him, and he knows that I do, he'll be the best watchman in the Green Forest.
And this shows that Paddy the Beaver has a great deal of wisdom. For it was just as he thought. Sammy was on hand bright and early every morning. He made sure that Old Man Coyote was nowhere in the Green Forest, and then he settled himself comfortably in the top of a tall pine tree where he could see all that was going on while Paddy the Beaver worked. Paddy had finished his canal, and a beautiful canal it was, leading straight from his pond up to the aspen trees. As soon as he had finished it, he began to cut the trees. As soon as one was down, he would cut it into short lengths and roll them into the canal. Then he would float them out to his pond and over to his storehouse. He took the larger branches, on which there was sweet tender bark, in the same way, for Paddy is never wasteful. After a while he went over to his storehouse, which, you know, was nothing but a great pile of aspen logs and branches in his pond close by his house. He studied it very carefully. Then he swam back and climbed up on the bank of his canal.
"Mr. Jay," said he, "I think our work is about finished."
What?
cried Sammy.
Aren't you going to cut the rest of those aspen trees?
"No," replied Paddy. "Enough is always enough, and I've got enough to last me all winter. I want those trees for next year. Now I am fixed for the winter. I think I'll take it easy for a while."
Sammy looked disappointed. You see, he had just begun to learn that the greatest pleasure in the world comes from doing things for other people. For the first time since he could remember, some one wanted him around, and it gave him such a good feeling down deep inside. End of chapter 22. And end of section 6. And end of the adventures of Paddy Beaver. Recording by John Leader, Bloomington, Illinois.